set you in your state.
Okay, so here's what I know about Tangerine Dream.
Tangerine Dream is a electronic music group from Germany, founded in 1967.
I know they did some of the ambient, incidental music for 80s movies like Legend,
Sorcerer,
Risky Business,
Firestarter,
The Keep,
and Near Dark. And out of all the people that we've talked about on this series, I would have to say that Tangerine Dream have probably been heard by more people than any of the other records that we've talked about. Reason being those soundtracks. They did soundtracks to a number of high-profile 80s movies, and you no doubt heard them even if you didn't know who they were.
And thanks to the time I spent with Modular 2 a few months ago, I know that they're considered one of the founders of what they call krautrock.
It's been a few months since we had a good dose of krautrock around here.
Still not comfortable with that term. I know there's like 3 of them. Their instrumentation is largely keyboards, synthesizers.
Synth pioneers.
Dude. What? I'm looking at their Wikipedia page right now, and I promise you're not prepared for what I'm about to tell you. Okay, should I sit down? Or since their formation in 1967, they've had 28 people in the band, 29 different lineups, and 58 different guest artists and ensembles.
Their lineup changes over the decades are almost as diverse and hefty as their catalog. Over the decades, upwards around 30 different musicians have passed through the ranks of Tangerine Dream.
With only the founder, Edgar Frosa, being in every version of the band until he passed away in 2015. Whoa.
In the mid-2000s, Edgar's son, Jerome, took the helm and has it to this day.
They've released over 100 albums.
They have a massive discography that goes for several decades.
I'm not talking compilations or greatest hits or best of. 100 different studio albums and soundtracks. So in other words, Rubycon here represents less than 1% of their total output by less than 5% of their total personnel. So if I wanted to get a true feel for what Tangerine Dream is all about, it's going to take a lot more time than we got this week, Captain.
Their early concerts were basically 3 guys playing modular Moogs. There wasn't a whole lot to see. As a matter of fact, some concerts they actually performed in the dark. But by the mid-70s, their show became rather elaborate, including lasers and interesting projections and lighting, the likes of which was cutting edge at the time. It became quite the extravaganza to go see a Tangerine Dream show.
So why Rubycon, you think? What's special about this album? Don't know. Maybe because it's a virgin release from 1975?
And I'd say their most acclaimed records are probably the ones that they did in the 70s. They did an album a year, basically, for the whole decade.
Maybe because it was recorded at the Manor, same place they recorded Tubular Bells and Flying Teapot and Leg End. It did get to number 10 in the UK charts, though. Maybe that's it. Huh. Any clue about what's on the album? None whatsoever. That figures. The first thing I can tell you about Rubycon is that it's a very different album depending on how you listen to it. If you were to put it on some speakers while you're doing laundry or something, it's pleasant enough, unobtrusive background ambience. But if you have it on headphones and give it your complete attention, it becomes an entire story with tension and development and drama and subtle but noticeable denouement and conclusion. And of course, now I have the challenge of trying to explain all of those different elements in a tangible way, because there aren't clearly defined subdivisions to this music. Just 2 17-minute pieces called Rubycon Part 1 and Rubycon Part 2. But even within those 2 suites, there aren't clearly defined development points. Things kind of smear together, gradually into each other. It feels a bit like trying to explain the development of the movement within a lava lamp while it's warming up. I don't know, man. It kind of started out like... And after a while, it just kind of got like... But I'll do my best. Okay, so Rubycon Part 1. It starts with some low bell tones and some very short 3 and 4 note enigmatic melodies. Slowly the melodies start to expand into longer phrases, chorus is added to the bell tones, and then we get some long, sustained chords on a synth, at which time the melodies become thinner and more drawn out, but also more diatonic, less enigmatic. And that atmosphere of simple melodies, sustained chords, and these fleeting little sonic chorus effects, that continues until about 6 minutes in, when the chords drop out and the fluttering chorus effects take over for a time. Slowly, a low tone comes in underneath it all and becomes the pedal note for a sequenced bass line. The bass sequence changes in length from like 4 notes to 5 notes and eventually to 6 notes, where it lands for a while. And that 6-note loop kind of defines a waltz time space. And in that space, we get heavily chorused organ and synth pads that play contrapuntal melodies over each other. And that sets up the one kind of clear dividing moment that happens on the entire album. On side 1, when you hear this, it means that a thought has ended, or perhaps that a change has occurred. But once you get keyed into this pattern and you hear it repeat a few times, that provides the biggest surge of kind of subdued intensity on the album. And for that reason, I think I like side 1 better than 2. Eventually, the bass fades out, the fluttering echoes fade out, the melodies resolve. End of side 1. Side 2 is less dynamic, but darker. The highlight of side 2 for me is the mellotron work. Anyway, about 3 minutes in, the mellotron is emulating a male chorus over some very dissonant and brooding passages. You know what it feels like? It feels a lot like another Ligeti piece, Atmosphères, right? The vocal piece that was used for the end of the Moon section on 2001: A Space Odyssey. And if Bowie was taking his cue from Tangerine Dream, it might just explain why we were hearing Ligeti influences on the electronic pieces of Low and Heroes, right? And at about 5 minutes in is where the sequencer appears again. But this time it serves more as a main melody than a bass line, with the 8-note sequence chopped and subdivided in multiple different permutations, even transposed a couple of times. And as this sequence was kind of getting chopped up and transmogrified, it struck me how interesting it is that you can get so much musicality out of just 3 repeated notes, if you set it up properly. Eventually, though, the mellotron switches to a string section, and the sequencer fades out. And for the last 5 minutes or so, there's some panned filter white noise effect that feel like, the ocean, like waves. And that segues into a piece for flute, organ, and synth that sounds to me a bit like stylish 60s horror movie atmospherics. This is interesting music, I think. Not in a, wow, this really speaks to my soul kind of a way, but more like, I find this fascinating for technical and philosophical reasons. That kind of interesting. Mostly, though, I have questions. Before getting into that, though, I've got some work to do. I'm on the record for having a love for all things Moog, but it might be worth taking a minute to explain how I got there. It started with researching how Jan Hammer got his Fender Rhodes to sound so evil on the first Mahavishnu album, The Intermounting Flame. It turns out the effect he was using was called a ring modulator. And after doing some more research at the time, I found out that you could get a ring modulator guitar effect made by Moog in the form of their Mogerfoger MF102. Ta-da! A giant wood-sided monstrosity that cost way more than I had ever spent on a pedal. But then my wife at the time bought it for me as a gift. And not only did I love the sound that you could get from the pedal, but I also loved the fact that you could plug an expression pedal into any one of the 5 or 6 jacks on the back, and that gave you the ability to sweep the knob as if you were turning it with your hand. No ring modulator? ring modulator with the frequency all the way pretty much down. Small tremolo effect. But now I'm going to be sweeping the frequency and listen to what happens. And once I learned a little bit about control voltage, which is the magic behind how that technology works, I was hooked. I got a ton more Moger pedals. I got a few of the mini Foger pedals, 5 of their synthesizers. I even got myself a Moog endorsement. Then I saw the 2014 documentary, I Dream of Wires.
The modular synthesizer is the ultimate.
And that got me into the world of modular synthesizers. I've been building my rig for a few years now. I've even recorded a few things with it. What I've learned about performing and recording with sequencer-based modular synthesis is that it doesn't have very much in common with traditional music composition and execution. Starting from zero, it takes me a long-ass time to get a patch together that I think sounds good. And once I have one going, man, I can't imagine any kind of a way to recreate it once I tear it down. And that brings me to my questions about Tangerine Dream. Did Edgar Froese have the complete shape of the piece in mind before the performance started? Or did it evolve as a group improvisation? Or maybe somewhere in between? Maybe it was conceived in sketches with the 3 of them signaling each other when it was time to start a new section. And since I don't hear the sequenced notes changing during the pieces, I mean, certain notes will be dropped and others added, but the 8 core notes stay the same throughout an entire piece. That means I have to assume that there was some pre-programming and some pre-patching done to get the oscillators tuned, the sequences programmed, the delay dialed in, the range of the cutoffs, all of that. In any event, what I did is I took my best guess for what might have been happening on the album and tried to apply that to the music that Sean and I made for this week. And I think that might be my biggest takeaway from Rubycon. I don't know that I find it to be, in a general sense, compelling music, but it makes for great ambience. And it does indeed develop nicely. But I think mostly for me, it gives me a framework that I can use for not having an actual piece that is recreatable, but having an event that has the same outline of the piece that I envision when I sit down to perform with the modular synthesizer, especially in a duo or a group setting. But now here's the real question. Do I really want to start digging into Tangerine Dream's 100-plus album discography?
Some of their most notable albums were done in the first decade of the band's existence, including their debut called Electronic Meditation from 1970. Follow-up in 1971 was Alpha Centauri. Zeit from 1972 is a big favorite of Steven Wilson and a number of other proggers. Atom from 1973 was the follow-up. And then a couple really big ones. Phaedra from 1974.
And maybe tell you about Phaedra
is a popular favorite, as is Rubycon, 1975. Stratosphere from 1976. Cyclone from 1978, and Force Majeure from 1979 are all quite memorable. And then as they move into the 80s, they have a number of interesting albums as well, including Tangram from 1980, Exit from 1981, White Eagle from 1982, and the list goes on. Pretty much every year they put out an album.
That's kind of terrifying.